All right. Thank you very much, Marcus. Everyone, annyeonghaseyo. I'm pleased to meet all of you virtually. I wish I could be there in person. I will start with a presentation. Share screen. Can you see my presentation? And can you hear me? That was yes. Okay, I will start and go for maybe 29 minutes, 25 minutes. So thank you for the honor and distinct pleasure of speaking to all of you. I understand this is the Next Generation Authentication Research Society workshop. I'm very honored to talk with you. And again, I'm Claire Nelson. I'm the Executive Director for the Decentralized Identity Foundation, also known as DIF. So today I'll cover two topics, a DIF overview, and then I'll also give a DIF update. And there is a lot going on. We won't have time all of this. So I'm glad that Marcus is there and he'll be able to cover some of that with you. My slides are advancing very quickly. Go back to play from current slide. So for the overview, the first thing I'll touch on is what does DIF do? Why do we exist? Was that a question? I'll keep going. So DIF does three basic things. Number one, we innovate for rapid development of specifications that become standards. DIF is a great place for people of great minds to come together and work on new ideas, try things. Maybe they fail fast and come up with something new, but it's a great hotbed for innovation. And number two, we create software building blocks and tools for identity solutions comprising DIDs and VCs. I understand this is an advanced audience, so DIDs are decentralized identifiers, and VCs, of course, verifiable credentials. And then thirdly, the third thing, DIF maintains reference open source implementations and software stacks. And we are in the midst of talking with Consensus Mesh and soon the Veramo code, which is a full stack. It's a good example of how to implement decentralized identity solutions will be transferred to the Decentralized Identity Foundation. So why do we create building blocks? And there's a here. So vendors build products, but ecosystems need building blocks. And they need building blocks to make hard things easy and to ensure interoperability. And it's very important that privacy be built in and not bolted on afterwards. And this is a quote from Anil John. He's a director. He works at the United States Department of Homeland Security. Marcus Sabadello mentioned a project he's working on that's in conjunction with some of the programs, the Silicon Valley Innovation Program run by Anil John. So we have great supporters from all over the world. We're glad to see supporters in Korea. And there's also a lot happening in the US where people recognize that we need building blocks to create these solutions. So the primary focus for DIF, you're probably all familiar with this, DIDs and VCs as defined by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. They have the standards for DIDs and for VCs. And then on the right, you see this diagram with issuer, holder, and verifier. That's the basic model. And these are the constructs that we used. And these are the basic building blocks we collaborate with. Can all of you hear me? I hear some talking in the background. Can you hear me? I'll keep going. And you'll notice at the bottom of every slide, I hope you have a copy of these slides, sent them ahead of time. On the bottom of every slide, there's a link. And this is meant to be a reference so you can do further research. And one thing that I often remind people is that DIDs are not just about people. Decentralized identifiers can be a reference to an organization, a thing, a data model, an abstract entity. So for IoT, Internet of Things, there are many projects going on utilizing DIDs. And it could be any object, even basketballs. Some of you may know that there are smart basketballs. They have chips inside. You could use decentralized identifiers to identify those smart basketballs. There are many unique and evolving use cases for DIDs or decentralized identifiers. And for our focus is in 4 main areas. We have structured collaboration. We write technical specifications that become standards. I spoke earlier of reference implementations. And this 4th block on the right, industry coordination, that is essential because DIF works with many other organizations in concert to bring solutions to bear. And I have a slide later on. We'll talk about many of the other organizations that we work very closely with. So DIF is part of the Linux Foundation. We are a Linux Foundation project. We are a nonprofit, and the type of nonprofit is 501c6. That means we serve our members, and all of the work is protected. All the specifications are protected under the W3C patent policy, and all software is protected under G2, the Apache license. And then just recently in May, the Linux Foundation announced its Digital Trust Initiative. There's a website for this. It's in the sources down the lower left-hand corner. And DIF, you see, was part of this announcement. And Open Wallet Foundation is a part of it. Trust over IP. These are all Linux Foundation projects. And the goal for the Digital Trust Initiative is to make it easier for people to find these projects. So you might be an open source developer, or you might be creating the next standard and may not be aware of all of these great projects that are under the Linux Foundation. And that's why they're creating more ways for people to find these and raise awareness. So a DIF update. At the core of DIF is the working group, and that is where specifications or tools are created. People come together from all over the world. And we have 8 basic working groups. I don't have enough time to go through them all in detail, but Claims and Credentials has released Presentation Exchange version 2. The Secure Data Storage group worked on something called Decentralized Web Nodes, or DONs. And if you've heard of a company called TBD, it's also related to a company called Block. These decentralized web nodes are part of their Web 5 strategy. And imagine if you had a personal data store that could follow you around. Maybe you could have a personal data store for travel. And so the personal data store would know about airlines, hotel, rental car, and you could have a seamless experience. There are many use cases for personal data stores, and you'll probably see more and read more about decentralized web nodes. DIDCOM, maybe you're familiar with DIDCOM. That's a communication protocol, a peer-to-peer, private, secure means of communicating. And it's transport agnostic. You can communicate over HTTPS, Bluetooth, even SneakerNet or snail mail. So it's a very exciting protocol. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the Applied Cryptography Group, they're working on zero-knowledge proofs. Zero-knowledge proofs are a mechanism for asserting something is true without releasing or revealing any information about that assertion. You could assert something about your age. You could assert that you have a library card. You could assert any other aspect or reference and use zero-knowledge proofs to maintain privacy. And we have a flavor of that called BBS. And BBS comes after the authors, Bonnet, Boyan, and Shockham. And there's some exciting work going on there because the work for BBS, for zero knowledge proofs, was incubated at DIF and is now on its way to becoming a standard at IETF. And IETF is an Internet Engineering Task Force. Identifiers and discovery, Marcus Sabadello can tell you a lot about what's going on there. And they're creating many of the tools that are used for the decentralized identity solutions. Wallet security, want to make sure you can back up containers. Sidetree, imagine a spec that doesn't care what the underlying ledger is. It could be the underlying digital ledger, Bitcoin, it could be Ethereum. And then DID authentication is an example of some work that's gone to the OpenID Foundation and is the underpinning for OIDC for VP and OIDC for verifiable credentials. And there's a lot here, but this is a reference chart. Ooh, I hear feedback again. This is a reference chart with links, and it's a way to look just on one slide and see what we're calling the top 10. What are some of the top 10 contributions that DIF has made for decentralized identity? And again, I don't have time to cover all of these in great detail, but the universal resolver, if you want to go from a DID and create a DID document, etc., there's a lot, many people start off and they use the universal resolver, and it's the way they learn about decentralized identity. And Marcus Sabadello is one of the key contributors who created that. Here's the link to so you can more. And since Marcus is there, ask him more questions about that. And Sidetree, DIDCOM, you recognize from the working groups what we're working on, and then you can go and click on these links and learn more about them. So this slide is very important. If you take away one thing, this is very important to learn that DIF does not exist alone. DIF works very closely with many other organizations in this ecosystem. And I mentioned W3C, they created the specifications for VCs and DIDs. And IETF, that's where the applied cryptography, the work on zero knowledge proofs or BBS signatures has gone. OpenID Foundation, a lot of their work is based on work that started or was incubated at DIF. And then Trust over IP Foundation. I'll give you an example of how we work closely together. The DIDCOM protocol is a candidate for the trust spanning protocol used by the Trust over IP Foundation. And if there was one foundation where two of us would combine forces and perhaps merge, DIF and Trust over IP. We have a very close working relationship, and we have many members in common. So if you're not familiar with the work of Trust over IP, you could look that up and learn more. And then here's the link to this diagram that shows that DIDs, decentralized identifiers, are at the core, this layer one of the Trust over IP stack. And they have technology stacks and governance stacks. And then Open Wallet Foundation, we were part of their launch back in February. And again, we work very closely with FIDO. So one key takeaway is that there's a lot going on in this industry, and DIF works very closely with all of these organizations. So let's take a look at, and this is a working group that Marcus Sabadello heads. He can talk. I'll just talk about one thing that I find fascinating is that when you think about tools, and if you're a developer, where do you go, or what kind of tools do you need to make your life easier? And so I'll just point to one thing on this slide, and that's DID lint. So how do you know that your DID document has correct syntax? So this is an example of how, ooh, I hear some more feedback. This is an example of how the Decentralized Identity Foundation is creating tools and making it easier for developers, and that's how we accelerate the adoption of decentralized identity. And I'll look at the charter is up here for the diff identifiers and discovery working group, and on specifications, limitations, test suites, and this includes, but is not limited to, the W3C DIDs, or decentralized identifiers. I mentioned DIDCOM. That is a messaging protocol. And if you want to exchange information with people, or you want secure messaging, this is a terrific way to use DIDs as the underlying technology and have a private peer-to-peer communication. And the beautiful thing about DIDCOM is that to set up DIDCOM, you would exchange DIDs. So let's say that you and I are going to set up a peer-to-peer communications. Once we exchange DIDs, we have mutually authenticated. So there's great power in using DIDs, and there's some references here if you want to learn more about DIDCOM, this peer-to-peer messaging protocol. And then here's a block diagram showing decentralized web nodes. And here you see the DID resolver in the middle and blockchain here, and you could have different nodes sharing. And the whole goal of this is to have personal data stores that can be securely stored. And again, I mentioned that TBD and block. TBD is the name of a company, TBD, and then block is the name of the company. I know that if you search for those companies, it's hard to find them, but if you search for decentralized web node, we have some AMAs, Ask Me Anything, and some videos on YouTube that explain more about decentralized web node, how it's used, the use cases, and what you would do with a personal data store. And here I'll give a quick update on what we're doing with zero knowledge proofs and the BBS signatures. And on the left side is an update from March. On the right side is an update from July. You can see they're making rapid progress. So in March, members of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, namely Tobias Looker and Vasilis Kalos, presented BBS to the IETF in Yokohama. So this was a high honor for them. You can watch their presentation. So here you see YouTube video. There's a link to the video. Start at minute 41, and you can listen. And then there's a great deck. You can click here. It says source the BBS deck. There's a great deck that is the BBS signature scheme and some of the pioneering work that they are doing. And keep in mind, this all sounds complicated, and maybe you're not familiar with zero knowledge proofs, but the end goal is to have privacy preserving processes or privacy preserving methods. And the underlying technology for that is zero knowledge proofs, or this BBS signature scheme. And here on the right-hand side, you can see that in July, draft 03 was posted and accepted by the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. And here you can see the timeline and things happening. There's more to learn about, but this is exciting, pioneering work that's incubated at DIF and then becomes a standard at IETF. This is another slide about the BBS signature scheme. You can see this is the abstract. It's on its way to becoming an RFC. An RFC is a request for comment, just like TCP and IP are RFCs. And this is a screenshot from one of the decks, and you can see that it's explaining how zero knowledge proofs are used for privacy preserving operations. And then hackathons. So in June, we had a hackathon. I can give you a preview. In October of this month, we'll have another hackathon, and this time with a cash prize. And these hackathons are great ways for people to come together and be introduced to this identity solutions and some of the basic building blocks. Or sometimes people are expert and they want to work on something more advanced. So we have beginners, we have intermediate, we have advanced people. And the winner for the June hackathon created a personal finance solution. So keep your eyes open for the next DIF hackathon, and it will be in October. And then this is an example of a use case. Many people ask me, well, what are some use cases? And this slide comes from Dr. Suzanne Guth-Orlowski. There's a link on the bottom to look this up. And in the EU, they have a notion of a digital product passport. This will be enforced in the next few years. Whoops, I'll go back. This will be enforced in the next few years. So let's say you're building a product and you want to keep track of all the energy used to create the product. You want to keep a track of the supply chain of all the different SKUs and units that were used to create a product. This notion of a product passport will be enforced, and they're using decentralized identifiers and DIDs to create the architecture for the EU digital product passport. And then you'll notice, I get this question a lot. So if you have the DID document, that's where the public key is. The private key should always be secure, perhaps in a wallet. You never want to put the private key on a ledger or anything anywhere public. So the private key is kept safe and secure, and it's the public key that is out in the public. We're all familiar with PKI, and we've learned about it from traditional PKI, public key infrastructure, and now in the decentralized world, we're relearning about it again. And so always make sure that the private key is stored securely. A wallet is one good place for that. And now, this is for the best slide. We are very proud of the DIF Korea. And many thanks to Mr. Kung-Chil Park for heading this and leading the effort. And the DIF Korea SIG has experts from many different areas, industry, academia, and say enough about how proud we are of the work you're doing. Whoops, my slide went. And it's fascinating that we had a blog on the bottom left here. You can see we had a guest blog, and we had a newsletter featuring the Korea SIG, and we got more good feedback from the announcement of the DIF Korea SIG than any other SIG. And the kickoff was in July. Many people attended. Thank you very much for making sure that many people knew about the kickoff and attended. And here you can see on the right-hand side a picture of the kickoff meeting in Busan. This is tremendous because DIF is a global organization. And we realize that it's important to have something like a SIG, a special interest group, where people can speak local language and connect with use cases. So this was a tremendous turning point for DIF, and I hope for Korea to be able to work together and share all of these things happening for open standards and open source software. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and attention. And then I'm going to skip ahead. I have 3 backup slides that may be of interest to you. This is for Marcus Sabadello. You have to go to the DID resolver. I have this in here. You can probably draw this from scratch or put it on a whiteboard. The other backup slide shows more in our ecosystem. This is from DID Day. There was a conference in March just for DIDs. This was in Colorado. And then Gartner, YPro, the EU Parliament, they're all talking about decentralized identity. It's a big deal now, reaching a point where the emerging technology is maturing. And then here, this is very important. I have 3 pages of references. Don't feel badly if you don't understand everything about decentralized identity. It takes a long time. It's a journey. I advise you to pick 1 or 2 topics that interest you and dive deeply. So this is page 1, page 2, page 3. So 3 pages of references, and feel free to reach out to me. Let's go back to my email, reach out to Marcus. And one of our great delights is to talk with people about decentralized identity. No question is too small or too big. We have many experts in Decentralized Identity Foundation, and we would like to help you and continue to work with you on your journey to create decentralized identity solutions. So with that, I will stop and see if there are any questions or comments.